began shooting moments after he was fired from the job he held for more than a decade, killing 5 of his co-workers. Good evening, I'm John Scott. This is the Fox Report. Police have identified the gunman as Gary Martin. They say he also wounded 5 responding officers before he was killed by police gunfire. Investigators say Martin showed up for work yesterday with a .40 caliber handgun. The Aurora chief of police says he was able to legally buy that weapon because of a botched background check that missed a prior conviction for aggravated battery.
According to witness at the scene who was part of that termination meeting, as that he reported for work, and during this meeting he was terminated. And my understanding from the witnesses is that he opened fire right after the termination. The fact remains is that some disgruntled person walked in and had access to a firearm that he shouldn't have had access to. I don't want to make it political. This is a human issue.
Mike Tobin has the latest from Aurora. Mike.
And John, Scott Hall, the president and CEO of Mueller Water Products, which owns Henry Pratt, where the shooting took place, says as they review their security protocols, he expects to find some shortcomings. Still, he says that Gary Martin would have been through a number of steps before this termination meeting that they had on Friday, in which the gunfire erupted. Hall says, though, the record he has seen thus far shows no indications of violent behavior.
We can confirm that the individual was being terminated on Friday for a culmination of various workplace rules violations in accordance with our agreement. I can also confirm that we conducted a background check when the employee was hired 15 years ago.
3 were killed in that meeting. 2 were killed outside of the meeting. The victims include the plant manager, the human relations manager, the human relations intern on his first day on the job. He was a student at Northern Illinois University. A stockroom attendant was killed and a mold operator. 5 police officers were shot. They are all expected to recover. Now, the gunman, Gary Martin, is dead. He had a number of run-ins with police, including a felony conviction from back in 1995. When that felony conviction was discovered, his firearms owner's identification card was pulled, but he was left in possession of that .40 caliber Smith & Wesson that he owned, the gun he used on Friday. Police say there were a number of spent magazines on the scene. They don't know the exact number. John?
Mike Tobin. Mike, thank you. Reaction continues to pour in after President Trump declared a national emergency at the southern border yesterday so he can secure funding for his proposed wall. Here's White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders.
Congress should have stepped up and fully funded all of the things that CBP and DHS have said they need to protect our border. But look, the president could drag this out, certainly over years, and we could spend the next decade building the wall. But the president wants to stop the national security and humanitarian crisis that's taking place at the border. He wants to stop it as soon as he can.
The move met with resistance from both sides of the aisle. Even some of those who support the president expressed caution about his declaration.
I think that even people like myself who support what the president did, we're all always a little bit careful or concerned about the executive taking this type of authority. But by the same token, Congress has actually authorized this type of activity. So I do get concerned about what the base is going to say.
Phil Keating is live in West Palm Beach, Florida, near Mar-a-Lago, where the president is spending the weekend. Phil?
John, the first lawsuit has now been filed challenging the legality and constitutionality of President Trump's national emergency declaration. That lawsuit filed on behalf of 3 Texas landholders as well as an environmental group. The White House is expecting to defend itself. They planned for these lawsuits, and they think they will win in court. A small crowd of Trump supporters showed up as usual along the route back from the golf club to the Winter White House on Palm Beach, cheering, waving flags, and holding up signs of presidential approval. Air Force One and the Trumps arrived in West Palm Beach Friday night. Earlier Friday at the Rose Garden, President Trump, of course, made that big announcement that he was signing the big budget deal into law, averting another partial government shutdown, but also declaring a national emergency over the southern border with Mexico. And with that, he plans to take billions of tax dollars from other sources to spend more money for the wall than the compromise legislation gives.
It's very simple. We want to stop drugs from coming into our country. We want to stop criminals and gangs from coming into our country.
Two men who disagree with the White House are California's governor and attorney general, both Democrats, that from the state that has the most impact of illegal immigration. They said California will
ask any expert. Don't ask politicians. Certainly don't ask the President of the United States. Ask any expert how these drugs are getting across the border.
This afternoon, White House spokesperson Sarah Huckabee Sanders tweeted out that after the golf outing, the president late this afternoon, met with his trade team, both in person at Mar-a-Lago as well as over the phone. Right now, the temperature is in the 70s. The high here was 80 degrees today, about 40 degrees warmer than Washington. Back to you.
Sounds nice. Phil Keating. Phil, thank you.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the humanitarian crisis at the southern border is steadily growing. Texas border agents say more and more migrants are trying to cross the dangerous Rio Grande River. Jackie Heinrich live in Eagle Pass, Texas for us now. Jackie.
Well, John, while it may not look like an emergency from where I stand on this side of the fence, it certainly is a different picture on the other side, where some 1,600 Central American migrants are being held in a warehouse, and they could be there for several weeks. It's pushed some of them to try to bypass the system. Just 1 mile of Eagle Pass, Texas, is protected by fencing. The rest of it is protected by the Rio Grande River, which acts as a natural barrier. Yet people still tried to cross. In just one day last week here in Eagle Pass, Border Patrol agents rescued 17 people in 3 separate river rescues. And since October, 4 people have died trying to cross the river. A major driving factor is the conditions in the Mexican processing facilities on the other side in Piedras Negras, Mexico. Those 1,600 migrants are being held in a warehouse with long wait times and scarce supplies. This week, a group of 100 of them clashed with Mexican federales, angry that they weren't being allowed to leave. Mexico has granted some 13,000 humanitarian visas to migrants since January. But now they're trying to break up large groups by busing them to other border towns hundreds of miles away.
I just want to thank the president because he's been helping us with these monstrous caravans that have been coming up. We had one that was up to over 15,000 people. It's largely broken up. Others have gotten through.
But Doctors Without Borders slammed the Mexican government's handling of the situation, saying that they were blocked from delivering aid. They wrote, "It should come as no surprise that protests have broken out. This terrible situation was made worse when humanitarian organizations were blocked from accessing the site and when migrants were transported from Piedras Negras to unsafe border cities." A little more than 1/5 of Texas, about 231 miles, is covered by fence. The new plan signed yesterday by President Trump, authorized 55 miles of new barrier in Texas. For comparison, President Obama authorized 48 new miles of fencing in this state, and President George W. Bush built more than twice that here. So whether a new fence or barrier would mitigate the illegal crossings is hotly contested, but what is certain is the immigration facilities here are overwhelmed. About 20 people get to Eagle Pass per day to have their asylum cases heard because the resources here are just so scarce. John.
Jackie Heinrich, live in Eagle Pass. Jackie, thank you. And the situation at the border is sure to come up when President Trump's senior advisor, Stephen Miller, joins Chris Wallace tomorrow for an exclusive interview on Fox News Sunday. Be sure to tune in at 2 p.m. or 7 p.m. Eastern Time right here on Fox News Channel. Some 2020 Democratic hopefuls hitting the campaign trail today as several of the declared presidential candidates made their cases to voters in critical early primary states. Among those with a busy Saturday schedule, Kamala Harris. At a town hall in South Carolina, the California senator accused the current administration of losing the American people's trust.
There are a lot of people, our neighbors, our friends, our family, our coworkers, who rightly are feeling a great sense of distrust in their government, its leaders and institutions. And we've got to deal with that. And one of the most important ingredients in trust is truth. So let's speak some truth about our country today.
Peter Ducey has more from Columbia. Peter.
John, 2 words that were never spoken at this afternoon's town hall here in Columbia: Donald Trump. But there was general discussion about the way a Democrat winning in 2020 would undo some of his administration's policies. There was even at one point skepticism expressed by a South Carolinian about the ambitious progressive agenda pushed by many presidential hopefuls, including Senator Harris.
I believe you've said you support Medicare for all and the Green New Deal. Simultaneously, we have a $22 trillion national debt and a $1.2 trillion deficit. How do you square that circle?
We have a tax bill that got passed that gave $1 trillion to the top 1% and the biggest corporations of America. And they need to give that money back.
Hundreds of South Carolinians lined up in Columbia about an hour and a half before the Harris Town Hall was set to start, but that doesn't mean they've all made up their minds. Most are doing their due diligence on all the Democrats.
I feel like, you know, as much as I like Kamala Harris, I also like Cory Booker, and I like Elizabeth Warren.
We're all about student loans and education, but we also want to know that she has, like, young people at hand, like our issues like education, student loans.
We're here, all of us from Columbia and other parts of the state, to hear out all the Democratic candidates because they're all great.
It's obvious how much Senator Harris values South Carolina's primary delegates, because at one point she joked that the people here are going to be seeing so much of her, they're going to be sick of her. John?
Peter Ducey. Peter, thanks. And we'll have plenty more on the early 2020 race coming up later in our hour with our guest, the Washington Examiner's chief congressional correspondent, Susan Ferriccio. An astonishing fall from grace. Pope Francis has dismissed former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick from the priesthood. The decision comes after the Vatican found the 88-year-old guilty of sex crimes. McCarrick, now the first ever U.S. cardinal to be defrocked.
You have to go back centuries. Somebody told me to the Council of Trent, that's almost 500 years ago, for a similar situation where a cardinal, a former cardinal, was laicized. So it's a very big decision in the history. It's a landmark decision in the history of the Church.
Brian Yennis is live in our New York newsroom with more. Brian.
John, this unprecedented move to defrock former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, or in other words, strip him of his priesthood because of sexual abuse, comes after the Vatican conducted its own investigation in which they concluded McCarrick was guilty of soliciting sex during confessions and abusing his power to commit an unspecified number of sexual abuse crimes against minors and adults. Last summer, Pope Francis stripped McCarrick of his title as cardinal after a sexual abuse allegation was deemed credible. The 88-year-old was once the Archbishop of Washington, D.C., and one of the most powerful people in the U.S. Catholic Church. McCarrick's career shows he continued to be promoted by the Catholic Church despite decades of sexual abuse allegations. He first became a priest in 1958. And in 1969, allegedly exposed himself to an 11-year-old boy, an abusive relationship that lasted decades. 2 years later, he allegedly abused a 16-year-old altar boy before becoming the Archbishop of Newark, New Jersey in 1986. In 1994, an unnamed priest wrote a letter claiming McCarrick groped two 15-year-olds and was caught having sex with a young priest. Still, McCarrick became the Archbishop of Washington, D.C. in 2001. In a statement, the president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Cardinal DiNardo, said, quote, "The Holy See's announcement regarding Theodore McCarrick is a clear signal that abuse will not be tolerated. No bishop, no matter how influential, is above the law of the Church. For all those McCarrick abused, I pray this judgment will be one small step among many toward healing." This news comes just days before the Vatican is hosting a 4-day summit beginning Thursday in which bishops will discuss preventing sexual abuse. The summit was formed as a result of mounting pressure on Pope Francis to take action. Plenty of questions leading into this summit, John, particularly whether there will be any punishment for Vatican officials who knew of McCarrick's crimes but covered them up for decades. John.
Brian Yennis. Brian, thank you. A high-level conference to bring world leaders together threatens to widen the rift between Europe and the United States, the issue driving the countries apart. Plus, U.S. aid on the way for the people of Venezuela, setting up a showdown with President Maduro's regime there. An exclusive interview with National Security Advisor John Bolton ahead.
I hope the American people do learn from this. I hope Juan Guaido and the opposition can fully take control in Venezuela. It was once a democratic, prosperous country, and the Chavez-Maduro socialist regime has driven it into a ditch, sadly.
News yesterday saying the move is, quote, a significant step forward. Jillian Turner has more.
There's a lot at stake here. We're supporting this popular movement in Venezuela.
In an exclusive interview with Fox News, President Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, says time's up for disputed Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro.
I can tell you among the key generals, the leading figures supporting Maduro, they're in constant conversation with the opposition. The press doesn't see this. It's not on the surface, but they're negotiating.
Clinging to power in Caracas, Maduro is firing warning shots at the Trump administration.
The infected hand of Donald Trump is hurting Venezuela. Hands off of Venezuela, Donald Trump. And Venezuela, imagine, John Bolton, Elliott Abrams, the group of extremists that surround him has put him through a dead end.
But Bolton isn't blinking.
Well, it's just another to add to my honor roll of criticisms from authoritarian figures around the world. I welcome it.
It's been more than 3 weeks since opposition leader Juan Guaido claimed the presidency, and yet the country's military remains firmly behind Maduro.
Venezuela has 2,000 generals. That is more than all the generals in every NATO country combined. So that tells you where the corruption is.
Sources tell Fox News President Trump has stopped shy of ordering the Pentagon to draw up military plans. But the prospect of unilateral military intervention remains high. Bolton says it's a top priority for President Trump.
We talk about it several times a day. He's very interested in this.
The Pentagon has also confirmed to Fox News that U.S. military planes have begun delivering humanitarian aid to the Colombian border. On Monday, President Trump will travel to Miami to address Venezuelan Americans. He'll make the case that socialist policies ultimately drive nations into the ground, a political warning for American voters ahead of 2020. John?
Jillian Turner. Thanks, Jillian. Vice President Mike Pence renewed his criticism of U.S. allies over Iran in a speech today at the Munich Security Conference in Germany. Despite the rift, Pence remained optimistic the alliance will stay strong going forward.
We came here to deliver a message that America is stronger, our economy is stronger, our military is stronger. We're standing with our allies. We're standing up not just for our priorities, but we're advancing the interests of the free world, and we've made great progress.
Kitty Logan has more from London.
Hi, John. So the Munich Security Conference is meant to be an opportunity for world leaders to hammer out their differences over global policies, but they found little common ground over Iran. Vice President Mike Pence spoke at the conference on Saturday. He laid out the different positions the US and Europe have over Iran and called on European leaders to back America's stance.
The time has come for our European partners to stand with us and with the Iranian people, our allies and friends in the region. The time has come for our European partners to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
The US pulled out of the Iran nuclear agreement last year, but European leaders have been trying to save the deal. And again today, German Chancellor Angela Merkel said that Germany and other European countries would continue to stick with it. She described the deal as an anchor point for the West to keep up pressure on Tehran. Iran's foreign minister was also at the conference, meeting his German counterpart. The US has accused Iran of not keeping to the terms of the deal, which is to halt nuclear development. Iran denies this. Vice President Pence also met with Afghan President Ashraf Ghani. The US, of course, is currently playing a role in peace talks in that country. And he spoke with the Ukrainian leader to reinforce support for Ukraine's fight against Russian-backed rebels. The conference is set to continue through Sunday as well, but it's unlikely that those positions over Iran will shift at all. John?
Kitty Logan reporting. Thank you, Kitty. In Zimbabwe, at least 60 miners are feared dead after heavy rains caused a dam wall to collapse nearly 5 days ago, flooding nearby mine shafts. Rescuers today pulled 8 survivors from underground. More than 20 bodies also recovered. Dozens of small-scale gold miners remain trapped underground. The government says rescuers are unlikely to find any more survivors at this point. The first lawsuits have been filed in response to President Trump's national emergency declaration on the southern border. How it could all play out in the courts. Plus, Amazon's cancellation of its planned HQ2 in New York, possibly exposing a rift in the Democratic Party and providing fuel for critics who accuse the party of being anti-business.
We do not have to settle for scraps in the greatest city in the world. We deserve more, and we can ask for more. And if people don't want to negotiate, that's their problem, not ours.
I think the president's on absolutely solid ground. This is an authority that dates back to 1976. It's been used 58 times. We have national emergencies declared that date back 40 years.
The president immediately went over the will of Congress by declaring an emergency using another law to achieve that. That's a very, very fundamental question. And if you are a strict constitutionalist, as most conservatives are, this is a fundamental issue of the separation of powers. And frankly, it needs to be resolved.
Lawmakers divided after President Trump declares a national emergency at our southern border. Hello, I'm John Scott, and this is the Fox Report. It's the bottom of the hour. And if you're just joining us, the president's declaration bypasses Congress to use money from the Pentagon and counter-drug efforts to pay for part of his long-promised border wall. The move met with bipartisan resistance in Congress, and legal challenges to the national emergency declaration already are on the way. Ellison Barber is live in Washington with more. Ellison.
Hi, John. Yeah, one lawsuit was filed yesterday on behalf of 3 landowners in South Texas and a nonprofit environmental group. The ACLU says that they will file a lawsuit early next week as well. But if I can, I'm going to take you back a little bit to that lawsuit. So again, it involves 3 landowners from South Texas filed yesterday. Also an environmental group. The environmental group says the proposed border wall will destroy critical wildlife habitat and hurt their members by impairing their ability to observe wildlife. The federal government reportedly told the landowners if money became available in 2019, parts of the wall would be built on their property. The lawsuit says the construction of a wall pursuant to the declaration threatens an imminent invasion of their privacy and the quiet enjoyment of their land, both during construction and after. Now back to the ACLU. They say they're going to file a lawsuit of their own early next week. House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler says his committee is launching an immediate investigation, and they want the White House lawyer and some DOJ officials to testify at a hearing in the coming days. Democrats say President Trump is overstepping and he does not have the authority to do this. They also say he's changing the game, setting a dangerous precedent, one that Republicans may come to regret. Some Republicans, like Senators Marco Rubio, Ron Johnson, they're skeptical when it comes to the national emergency declaration. Senator Rand Paul called the decision disappointing. Senator Susan Collins said it is a mistake, one that undermines the role of Congress and is of dubious constitutionality. But many Republicans are siding with President Trump, even if their Democratic colleagues disagree.
He has United States Supreme Court precedent in his favor from a 1993 ruling. He has statutory authority from the Congress on the 1976 Emergency Act.
Article 1, Section 9 is very, very clear. No appropriation except through a law passed by Congress.
It is a real emergency situation.
This precedent is somehow allowed to stand. They should be cautious about what that might mean in the future.
President Trump has repeatedly said he expects this to end up in court. Yesterday, California's governor and attorney general suggested a multi-state lawsuit is on the way. Opponents say the president started digging his own legal grave in the Rose Garden yesterday.
I could do the wall over a longer period of time. I didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tweeted that clip of the president and said it is the clearest sign that this is not, in her words, a legitimate emergency. John?
Ellison Barber in Washington. Thank you. Been a busy day in Democrat politics as several contenders for the party's presidential nomination held events in New Hampshire and South Carolina. Meanwhile, in Washington, the DNC wrapped up its winter meeting as party leaders look ahead to a primary season packed with events and candidates. Garrett Tenney has more from Washington. Garrett.
Well, John, it's clear that immigration and border security are going to be a major focus of the 2020 election. And today, Democrats were out in force on the campaign trail talking about it. Take a look at this map to see where all the candidates and potential candidates are today, including Senators Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris in South Carolina, Congresswoman Eric Swalwell in Iowa, Beto O'Rourke in Illinois, and Senators Kirsten Gillibrand and Cory Booker in New Hampshire, where both went after the president's emergency declaration.
The only urgency is in President Trump's mind, but the real emergency is the humanitarian crisis he has created at the border by separating families. It is outrageous what he's doing.
I think that there's a serious violation of separation of powers that's going on by this president right now. It's something Republicans and Democrats all should stand in unison saying this is absolutely wrong, and worse than that, it's insulting.
Former Vice President Joe Biden is almost certain to join the 2020 race, according to sources with direct knowledge. And today, Biden was mingling with world leaders in Germany at the Munich Security Conference, where he took a number of shots at the Trump administration's policies, including immigration.
The America I see values basic human decency, not snatching children from their parents or turning our back on refugees at our border. Americans know that's not right.
On the final day of the Democratic National Committee's winter meetings here in D.C., Chairman Tom Perez touted the party's growing field of candidates to take on President Trump.
Throughout the primary, we'll be lifting up all of our candidates' voices to show why the choice is clear. One party's fighting for the American people, the other party's golfing. Pretty simple.
Perez also vowed that this time around, the DNC will treat every candidate fairly to avoid a repeat of the controversy in 2016, when it was later revealed the DNC was working with the Clinton campaign before she had won the nomination. John?
Garrett Tenney. Garrett, thank you.
You got it.
For more on this, let's bring in Susan Friccio, chief congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner. So Democrats sort of smell blood in the water. They think President Trump is easily beatable, but the party is having some problems of its own right now, Susan, especially when you look at the state of Virginia.
Well, that's true. It is possible that the president can be toppled. His poll ratings never really get above the 40% range. That's been his problem, though, since he became a candidate years ago. So he is definitely vulnerable. There's no question. Democrats need to get through their own primary season, though. There are a lot of candidates in the pool right now. It'll look similar to when there were so many Republican candidates running. It makes for a complicated process to come up with somebody who's really able to compete in the general election. And I think lately we've seen some evidence about how difficult this could be, because there's a sort of a socialist jolt hitting the Democratic Party right now that it's going to make it a little more difficult for them to really kind of identify what kind of party they are right now. Are they for super progressive Medicare for all, or are they going to go really super far and do this Green New Deal, elimination of fossil fuels that some of the younger voters might want? So it's going to be a hard time for them to kind of identify where they are as a party as they move through the primary season. And don't forget, right now we've got a bevy of candidates right now fighting for basically the lower end of the poll numbers right now. The two leading candidates polling right now have not even declared whether they're going to get in the race or not. Of course, that's Joe Biden. He's leading everybody else by about 10 points. And then Bernie Sanders. He was a very popular candidate from last time around. So they will completely shake up the field in so many ways if Biden and Bernie Sanders come in for completely opposite reasons. Biden, because he's more of a middle-of-the-road Democrat, at least he had been for years as a senator from Delaware. And then you're going to have Bernie Sanders, who's basically going to run on a socialist platform again. So the Democrats are going to be all over the map, and it's going to make the debates very interesting, and it's going to make it a little bit difficult for them, because they're going to have to walk a fine line trying to appeal to these very younger voters while not alienating the more middle-of-the-road Democrats who might be scared off by some of the proclamations of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and company when it comes to capitalism, when you just look what happened with the Amazon deal in New York. So they're having a little bit of an identity crisis right now.
On that point, Amazon was set to create, I don't know, 20,000 plus jobs in New York City, but the company pulled out because of local opposition. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman, tweeted out this. She says, "Yeah, I'm laughing at this. Amazon was not coming to my congressional district, had no concentrated outreach to us that I'm aware of, yet with no effort, I defeated the richest man in the world." Doesn't add up. Story that's not being told. The local community organized to reject it. But she seems pretty happy that Amazon is gone.
Well, the problem here is that she first of all, she did lead the way in protesting about it. She's a very public figure here. She's got millions of Twitter followers, social media followers. So she was a leading voice in this, even though it's not her district. She is from the Queens area that she represents, and she celebrated it. She celebrated the disappearance of this economic opportunity for the people in Queens. And I think it really kind of sent a shockwave through the party, because if you listen to Speaker Nancy Pelosi, her #1 priority, and she always says it, jobs, jobs, jobs. Well, here's the complete opposite tact here. It's just, forget the jobs. We just don't want to support the richest man in America with billion-dollar tax breaks that we would offer any company coming to New York, not just Amazon. So it's really kind of an attack against capitalism. That's part of what that wing of the Democratic Party is going for right now.
I want to interrupt you for just a second, because Karl Rove, who knows a thing or two about presidential politics, says that the position that many Democrats have staked out on the Green New Deal is not going to win them a lot of votes. Listen.